Darkness did not begin in the prison. It began long before the chains, long before the walls closed in, long before Yusuf, peace be upon him, ever saw the inside of a cell. It began the moment truth became inconvenient and purity became dangerous. A young man, alone in a foreign land, surrounded by power he did not possess and temptation he did not seek, stood at a crossroads where one step would lead to immediate comfort and another to lifelong consequences. And the choice he made would change history. Thank you for watching Islamic Insights channel. From which country are you watching this video? And if you love Islam and stories that strengthen your faith, subscribe to this channel and stay with us until the end. Yusuf, peace be upon him, had already suffered what would break most hearts. Betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a well, sold like property in a slave market, and taken far away from his father and homeland, he was then raised in the house of the Aziz of Egypt. Allah granted him beauty that stunned hearts, wisdom beyond his years, and character that reflected prophethood even before revelation was complete. Yet these gifts did not shield him from trials. They intensified them. When the wife of the Aziz locked the doors and called Yusuf toward sin, the moment was heavy with pressure. No witnesses, no escape, no worldly consequence. But Yusuf did not see an empty room. He saw Allah. He chose fear of Allah over fear of people, obedience over desire, and dignity over pleasure. The Quran tells us he ran toward the door, and that single act of running became proof that righteousness is not passive. It requires action. When the truth began to surface, when evidence showed that Yusuf was innocent, justice should have prevailed. But power often fears scandal more than it fears Allah. Instead of clearing his name, the leaders of the household decided that silence was safer than truth. Yusuf had done nothing wrong, yet he was made to pay the price for others' sins. His reputation was sacrificed to protect status, and his freedom was taken to protect image. In that moment, the story appears cruel and unfair, because a prophet of Allah was punished for refusing sin. And yet, this was not the fall of Yusuf. This was the beginning of his rise. When Yusuf was led to prison, he did not protest Allah's decree. He did not curse his fate. He did not question divine justice. Instead, the Quran records a statement that reveals the depth of his faith. He said that prison was more beloved to him than what they were inviting him to. This was not despair speaking. This was clarity. Yusuf understood that sometimes Allah saves you by removing you. The prison walls became a barrier between him and temptation, between him and corruption, between him and a society that would have slowly consumed his faith. What appeared to be confinement was in reality protection. What appeared to be humiliation was purification. Yusuf entered prison with nothing but his faith, and that faith was more powerful than the authority that imprisoned him. Inside those walls, time slowed. Days blended into nights. Hope seemed distant, yet Allah was closer than ever. Prison stripped Yusuf of every worldly attachment. No status, no family, no future promised by people. All that remained was reliance upon Allah, and in that isolation, Yusuf's heart was refined, patience was deepened, trust was perfected. Allah was preparing him quietly, far from the noise of society, far from temptation, far from distraction. Prison was not a pause in Yusuf's story. It was a workshop where Allah was shaping a leader who would one day carry responsibility over an entire nation. And even there, Yusuf did not live for himself alone. He did not retreat into silence or bitterness. He did not allow hardship to harden his heart. When other prisoners came to him troubled by their dreams, Yusuf did not immediately interpret them. He first spoke to them about Allah, about the oneness of Allah, about rejecting false gods and inherited ignorance, about a Lord who sees even behind prison walls. In a place designed to break men, Yusuf called people to purpose. In a place of despair, he planted seeds of faith. This is the nature of prophethood. Wherever a prophet is placed, guidance follows. Yusuf spoke with calm certainty. He explained that knowledge comes from Allah alone, that dreams are not meaningless, and that life is not random. His words carried weight because they were backed by character. The prisoners saw not only a man who could interpret dreams, but a man whose soul was anchored in truth. Prison did not diminish Yusuf's light, it revealed it. In the darkness of that place, Allah allowed Yusuf's gifts to shine, quietly preparing the world to one day listen when Allah decided the time had come. Inside the prison, something extraordinary was unfolding, though few could see it at the time. What most people around Yusuf saw was a young man unjustly imprisoned, another forgotten soul lost behind stone walls. But Allah was revealing a gift in that darkness, a gift that would become the turning key of Yusuf's destiny. Dreams had begun to trouble the prisoners, vivid and unsettling visions that clung to their minds even after waking. In a place where hope was scarce and fear was constant, dreams carried unusual weight. Two young men approached Yusuf, not because he held authority, but because his character commanded trust. They had watched him closely. They had seen his patience, his composure, his unwavering sense of purpose, and they sensed that this man was different. Before Yusuf offered them answers, he offered them truth. He reminded them that knowledge does not come from cleverness or intuition, but from Allah alone. He spoke of a Lord who controls the unseen, who sends signs not to confuse but to guide. Only after grounding them in faith did Yusuf interpret their dreams, and he did so with clarity, honesty, and courage. One dream promised release and return to service. The other foretold death. Yusuf did not soften the message. He did not manipulate the truth to gain favor. He spoke exactly what Allah revealed to him, demonstrating that integrity does not bend under pressure. And then he said something remarkable. He told them that the matter had already been decreed. The dream was not a possibility. It was destiny. When events unfolded exactly as Yusuf had said, the prison itself bore witness to his truthfulness. Word began to spread quietly among the inmates and guards alike. There was a man in the prison who spoke with certainty, whose interpretations never failed, a man whose presence brought calm even in despair. Yusuf did not realize it then, but Allah was slowly allowing his name to travel beyond the prison walls. The very place meant to erase him was becoming the place that introduced him to history. What seemed like isolation was exposure. What seemed like silence was preparation. Allah was lifting Yusuf's credibility before lifting his body from confinement. Before one of the prisoners was released, Yusuf made a simple request. He asked that his case be mentioned to the king. It was not desperation. It was not reliance on people. It was a lawful means taken with dignity. Yet when the man returned to comfort and power, Yusuf was forgotten. Days turned into months. Months stretched into years. The prison gates did not open. The promise of freedom faded into routine, and Yusuf remained where he was, watching seasons change through narrow openings, living a life unseen by the world. This was perhaps the most difficult test of all, not the accusation, not the chains, but being forgotten, forgotten by people he helped, forgotten by systems that owed him justice, forgotten in a place where time itself feels heavier. Yet Yusuf did not allow neglect to poison his heart. He did not grow resentful. He did not abandon worship. He did not question Allah's wisdom. Because while people forget, Allah never does. The delay was not abandonment. It was design. If Yusuf had left the prison when he first asked, he would have returned quietly to obscurity, another former slave with no influence and no protection. If he had been released without public acknowledgement of his innocence, whispers would have followed him forever. Allah was not merely planning Yusuf's freedom, Allah was planning his authority. And authority requires timing. Years in prison refined Yusuf's patience to its highest form. It detached his heart completely from reliance on creation and anchored it firmly in reliance on the Creator. Those years were not empty. They were full of unseen growth. Then, at the exact moment written by Allah, the entire kingdom was shaken by a dream. The king saw visions that none could interpret. Fear spread through the court. Advisors failed. Scholars were silent. Power stood helpless before the unseen. And suddenly, the forgotten prisoner was remembered. The name Yusuf resurfaced after years of silence, not as a criminal, but as the only one capable of explaining what Allah had decreed. In that moment, it became clear that Yusuf was never waiting on the prison to release him. The prison was waiting on the world to need him. Allah had delayed Yusuf's exit until his entrance would matter, until his words would carry weight, until his wisdom would save lives. The years of waiting were not wasted years, they were the final preparation before destiny unfolded. This is the lesson hidden within Yusuf's time behind bars. Allah's delays are never random. When doors remain closed despite effort and prayer, it is not always rejection. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is Allah arranging circumstances so perfectly that when the moment arrives, no human being can deny what he has written. Yusuf was forgotten by people so that he would be remembered by history. And when Allah chose to bring him out, he would not walk into uncertainty. He would walk into purpose. The dream that reached the palace was unlike any dream Egypt had known before. It was not personal, not symbolic of a single life, but heavy with the weight of an entire nation. The king saw 7 strong, healthy cows being devoured by 7 emaciated ones, followed by 7 green ears of grain and 7 dry, withered stalks. The images disturbed him deeply. This was not a fleeting vision of the night. It lingered in his chest like a warning. He summoned his advisors, his scholars, the interpreters who claimed mastery over symbols and signs, yet none could offer clarity. They spoke vaguely, dismissed it as confused dreams, and admitted their inability. In that moment, power stood helpless before the unseen. Wealth, armies, and authority could not decode what Allah had sent. It was then that memory pierced the fog of years. The man who had once shared a prison cell, the man whose words had proven true without fail, came rushing back into thought. Yusuf, the forgotten prisoner. The one whose interpretations had unfolded exactly as foretold. Desperation broke through negligence, and suddenly the prison was no longer a place of shame but a place of solution. A messenger was sent in haste, not with chains, but with questions. And Yusuf, still behind bars, still dressed as a prisoner, still waiting without bitterness, listened calmly as the dream was recounted. Yusuf did not hesitate. He did not ask for freedom in exchange for knowledge. He did not demand recognition before speaking. He interpreted the dream with clarity that reflected not only divine inspiration, but deep wisdom. He explained that 7 years of abundance were coming, years where the land would yield beyond expectation, followed by 7 years of severe famine that would consume what had been stored, and then a year of relief where rain would return and people would press grapes once more. This was not merely interpretation, it was strategic foresight. Yusuf went further, advising that grain should be carefully stored during the years of plenty, preserved in its ears to protect it, and rationed wisely when hardship arrived. In a single response, Yusuf revealed knowledge, leadership, and responsibility. The palace was shaken. The dream that had paralyzed the court was now fully exposed, its meaning undeniable, its solution clear. The king immediately recognized that this was not the speech of an ordinary man. This was wisdom rooted in truth. Orders were given at once for Yusuf to be brought out. Years of confinement were about to end. But Yusuf did something that astonished everyone. He refused to leave. Yusuf did not reject freedom out of pride. He rejected it out of principle. He knew that walking out of prison without clearing his name would leave a stain that power could never fully erase. He understood that leadership without integrity is hollow, and authority without truth is fragile. So he demanded that the matter of the women who accused him be reopened. He asked that the truth be publicly established, not whispered, not assumed, declared. This moment reveals the heart of a prophet. Yusuf had endured years of injustice in silence, but he would not accept honor built upon unresolved falsehood. He knew that Allah is just, and justice must be visible. The king summoned the women, and when questioned, the truth finally emerged without distortion. They confessed openly that Yusuf had committed no wrong. The wife of the Aziz herself admitted that she was the one who sought him, and that Yusuf was among the truthful. With that confession, the prison doors lost their power. Yusuf was no longer a prisoner in the eyes of people. He was a man vindicated by truth, cleared by testimony, and honored by Allah. When Yusuf finally emerged, he did so with his dignity intact, his reputation restored, and his integrity unblemished. The years of waiting had not weakened him. They had refined him. This was not merely a release, it was a transformation. Yusuf did not leave prison begging for a place. He stepped forward offering service. When the king recognized Yusuf's wisdom and trustworthiness, Yusuf requested responsibility over the storehouses of the land, not out of desire for power, but out of awareness of his own capability and the coming crisis. He knew the plan because Allah had shown it to him. He knew the danger because Allah had warned him. And he knew that leadership at that moment was not a privilege, it was a duty. This is the turning point where the prison reveals its true purpose. It was not meant to destroy Yusuf. It was meant to prepare him for the weight of leadership that would test even kings. Prison had taught him patience. Injustice had taught him restraint. Isolation had taught him reliance on Allah alone. Without those years, Yusuf might have had knowledge, but not endurance. He might have had wisdom, but not humility. Allah delayed his freedom until his character matched his destiny. The lesson is unmistakable. Allah does not elevate a servant suddenly without shaping them deeply. Yusuf was not raised from the prison to the palace by chance. He was raised because every step of hardship had carved him into someone who could carry responsibility without corruption. When Yusuf stood before the king, he was not merely a freed man. He was the answer to a nation's survival. And it was the prison, with all its darkness and silence, that made him ready. When Yusuf emerged from prison, he did not step into freedom as a man relieved of suffering. He stepped into responsibility as a man shaped by it. The king did not merely release him, he entrusted him with the storehouses of the land, placing in his hands the economic survival of an entire civilization. This transition was unprecedented. A former slave, once accused and imprisoned, now stood as a guardian over wealth, planning, and national security. Yet Yusuf did not celebrate the elevation as personal victory. He understood that this position was not an honor granted by people, but an amana entrusted by Allah. The years of abundance arrived exactly as Yusuf had foretold, and under his guidance the land prospered. Crops were harvested, measured, stored with precision and restraint. Yusuf implemented discipline where excess could have reigned, foresight where complacency might have destroyed everything. He did not hoard wealth for status, nor did he distribute it recklessly. He acted with justice, balance, and mercy, fully aware that famine was approaching and lives would depend on what was done in those years. When the years of hardship arrived, they came with full force. The land dried, hunger spread, and surrounding regions collapsed under the weight of scarcity. But Egypt stood firm. The storehouses Yusuf had protected became lifelines not only for Egyptians, but for people from distant lands who traveled seeking sustenance. Among those travelers were Yusuf's own brothers, unaware that the man controlling their fate was the very brother they had betrayed years earlier. This reunion did not occur by coincidence. Allah had woven every moment of Yusuf's suffering into a plan that would reunite a broken family, expose long-hidden guilt, and demonstrate that forgiveness is stronger than revenge. Yusuf had every worldly reason to retaliate. He possessed authority, power, and legitimacy, yet his heart had been purified long before authority reached his hands. Prison had stripped away ego and replaced it with mercy. When the moment came, Yusuf chose patience over punishment, forgiveness over vengeance. He tested his brothers not to humiliate them, but to awaken their conscience. And when the truth finally unfolded, when tears replaced arrogance and regret replaced denial, Yusuf revealed himself with words that echoed divine mercy. He told them there was no blame upon them that day, and reminded them that Allah is the most merciful of those who show mercy. This was not weakness. This was strength refined by faith. Yusuf then brought his parents to Egypt, raising them with honor, restoring dignity to Yaqub, and fulfilling the dream Allah had shown him as a child. The stars, the sun, and the moon bowing was not a dream of ego, but a vision of reconciliation, leadership, and divine planning. The prison that once confined Yusuf had been the bridge to the fulfillment of prophecy. Without it, Yusuf would not have been prepared to carry forgiveness without bitterness, power without arrogance, or success without forgetfulness of Allah. As Yusuf reflected on his journey, he recognized that every hardship had been intentional. Betrayal taught him resilience, slavery taught him humility, temptation taught him restraint, prison taught him patience, leadership taught him gratitude. None of these lessons could have been skipped, none could have been rushed. Allah had guided Yusuf step by step, shaping him through pain into a servant capable of carrying mercy to others. Yusuf acknowledged openly that Allah had been kind to him, bringing him out of prison and reuniting his family, while affirming that Allah is subtle in his plan and gentle in how he brings destiny to pass. The prison that saved a prophet stands as a timeless reminder for every believer. Hardship does not mean abandonment, delay does not mean denial, being confined does not mean being forgotten. Allah may close doors not to punish, but to redirect. He may withhold outcomes not to hurt, but to protect. Yusuf's story teaches that sometimes the lowest point of life is not the end of the path, but the place where Allah begins unveiling His greatest mercy. The prison was not Yusuf's downfall, it was his elevation. And the same Lord who carried Yusuf from darkness to authority continues to carry His servants, even when the path forward seems hidden behind walls.